Hi folks, welcome to Perf Mentor's micro learning session. In today's video session, we are going to discuss about the importance of data in SAP performance testing. For any testing, whether it's performance or manual or functional, right, data plays a very crucial role for testing that application in a right way. Even for SAP performance testing, data plays a crucial role. It's important that you need to have the right data set with the right diversification. Only then you'll be able to get the right results from it. So in this discussion or in this topic, we are going to discuss about what are the various characterization of the data that we have to use, and what are the challenges or what are the precautions that we have to take in order to manage the data properly. Those are the key areas we are going to discuss in today's session. First, realistic simulation. So one important thing that you need to consider in performance testing is you need to test it in the right way, what is expected. We cannot overdo or we cannot underdo. So we need to clearly understand what does the production traffic looks like, what are the data diversification they use. Either the customers use some thousands of data or like 10 data, or whatever the data set they use in production, we have to mimic, we have to use the same data set and simulate in the same way. I'll tell you what happens if you don't do that way, right? For example, if you're testing your for example the sales order, right, sales order process, you're testing with just two data set, two SKUs, right? What happens is, like, when you try to simulate it under high frequency or high volume traffic, the data gets locked, right, which might not happen in production or might not. So you need to clearly understand how the data pattern looks like in production, and you have to simulate the same exact behavior in your pre-prod environment. So the next I think the second point also I covered, right? So if you don't do that, you might encounter issues like locking. In few cases it might be required. For example, during times like promotion, they try to buy the same product, right? In such kind of scenarios, you need to try to mimic that behavior and see how you can improvise this logging, or how you can avoid these kind of problems. So in either of that case, first thing that you need to do is understand your production data pattern or the traffic pattern, right? Based on that, you need to simulate the same exact load on your test system. The next important thing that you need to focus on is the standing data setup. So what do you mean by standing data setup, right? So whenever projects which are starting building from the scratch, right, like all those greenfield implementation, what happens is they build a application from the scratch and they build all the infrastructure from the scratch, right? And they might not have any data in it. Maybe there might be few data that got created as part of a test execution, but other than that, it doesn't have that huge volume of records on the system. So what happens is, like, when you test the application with this clean database, it might give a better performance results. And when it goes to production, maybe the first few months it might be performing better. But as the days goes by, right, the accumulated data on the system increases, and that is when you will see the performance problem on your application. So it's important, when you start the testing for any greenfield implementation, right, and or when you are building the new infrastructure for your application to do performance testing, right? So it's important you do a careful considerations on the standing data setup. So this is something which might need input from different teams, architects, and you need to set up a call with all the required stakeholders, try to understand what is the data volume growth will be in 6 months or 9 months time. Like usually most project, they do all this important Black Friday testing every year. So based on that, you try to understand what does the data load looks like from 6 or 8 months from now. Accordingly, you try to see the data on your test environment. Only then you'll be able to identify the issues, what can happen 6 months from now. So it's important you have this discussion with all the stakeholders, try to understand what volume of data needs to be on the different tables on the database, and understand. I mean, it's a huge process. It might sound simple, but there is a lot of details underneath. So you need to understand what process creates that data set. There might be other tools which the DBA team might be knowing, using which they can push all those data into the system. So try to understand what are the business process, or what are the various approaches you can follow to seed the data on the database. The key point is you need to have a proper standing data on the system. You cannot test the SAP system with a clean database. Okay. And the next one is the inventory data setup process. So again, most of the times when the data is set up, there might be inventory, there might not be, or inventory might be set to very low value. In such cases, you need to identify the proper data set. If you want to test your application with some 10,000 products, right, you need to set some max value for those products. Okay. And the other thing is, like, if your architecture is a distributed system, right, like where there are like different multiple applications connected to an SAP system, it's important that whatever the inventory that your max inventory value that you're setting on the SAP, right, that data should be properly synced to all the connected system, whatever you're going to test. So this is very important. The reason being, so for example, you try to place an order from your commerce platform, it goes to SAP, and again it goes to some warehouse management system, and they try to do the fulfillment, right? And if they don't have inventory on their system, on the warehouse management system, maybe initially the process might work on the commerce platform, and even in SAP it might work, but when it on the warehouse management system, it might fail. So the reason I'm saying, right, like, all these applications are not tested in isolation. So when it comes to holiday testing or the Black Friday testing, right, all these loads will be injected from all these connected systems at the same time. So if you are building a workload model of that sort, it's important that you make sure whatever data you set up on one application is properly replicated and synced on all the connected system. The next important thing is staging the data. As I said, if it's a simple process that you want to test in isolation, it's not a problem. It's simple, straightforward testing, right? But if you're trying to test different business process and different application at the same time, right? So you need to understand the end-to-end workflow, flow 1, flow 2, flow 3, right? It might be multiple flows, and in order to do the flow 10 or the tail end of that process, you need to stage the data to the intermediate state so that the last flow can consume it directly. So it might be hard to understand unless you have a real working experience on SAP project. In simple words, you create transactional data well in advance so that the last process or a different business process can consume during the execution. Unlike the other project, right, in SAP project, we have to create a ton of this data, which might consume a lot of effort. So again, you need to have a proper strategy for how to stage this data, how you can optimize this process, right? All those things you need to take a good care before you start the performance testing. And the last but not the least is the housekeeping of the transactional data. As I said, you'll be testing multiple process using multiple application, and when you are doing these kind of repetitive testing, right, like all through the year that you might be doing some performance testing on the application. So what happens if some of this data might be stuck on the intermediate state in the open status? It might not get properly closed. When I say closed means, like, order gets placed, gets fulfilled, invoicing, all those things are done, and it has complete that end-to-end workflow. In most of the cases, as we are simulating multiple layers of this business process, as we are testing it in concurrency, we might end up creating a lot of open orders. Over time, this might have some degradation on the transaction response time. I don't want to get into the details. I'll say this with an example, right? For example, if you're creating too many purchase orders and sales order without being properly fulfilled, what happens is it creates a lot of open orders. Most recently, they are using this ATP check in a very extensive manner. So what happens whenever the ATP check happens, it goes and checks that particular SKU across all the open orders, right? If there are any open orders, it will give priority to that. I don't want to get into the details, but the thing is, if there are too many open orders, certain process might have to do a lot of scan of these open orders before providing the output to the customer. So it's important you do a proper housekeeping exercise maybe every week or monthly once to clean up this open entries, or you can fulfill it. Again, that's a long and tedious process. You need to connect with the architects and try to understand like what is the ideal flow, how it can be closed in a proper way. If you try to close it not in a proper way, it might have other implication as well. So it's very important you connect with the SAP architect and the functional team and try to understand how it needs to be properly closed or how it can be deleted from the system. All those things you need to sit with the functional team and understand and come up with the proper process. And one thing I would recommend for our performance testers is that you clearly define this data strategy, performance testing data management strategy, and these are just a high level viewpoints. Under this viewpoint, you need to understand how your application is built. You need to connect with your architect, functional team, and build a strong robust process to address all these key challenges related to the tied to the data setup. Hope this session was helpful. If you want to know more about performance testing and engineering, please do like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much. Bye.